Maid's daughter says, "I speak 5 languages." Millionaire laughs until the phone rings. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type "love" in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the elaborate crystal chandelier, its faceted surface casting prismatic rainbows across the ivory walls of Richardson Enterprises' executive boardroom. David Richardson adjusted the platinum cufflinks on his custom-tailored Armani suit jacket, his steel-grey eyes methodically scanning the faces of 12 carefully selected board members who represented the most influential financial minds in Manhattan. At 38, he commanded Richardson Enterprises with the surgical precision of a master strategist, and today's pivotal meeting would ultimately determine whether his multinational corporation would secure the most lucrative international contract in the company's 40-year history. The towering floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the bustling city below, where storm clouds were gathering ominously on the horizon. David's corner office occupied the entire top floor of the Richardson Tower, a gleaming monument to corporate success that pierced the Manhattan skyline like a steel and glass dagger. "Gentlemen," David's authoritative voice cut through the room like a precisely honed blade, commanding immediate attention from every person present. The Soul Partnership represents exactly $2 billion in guaranteed revenue over the next 5 years, with potential expansion opportunities that could triple that figure. Our Korean partners have explicitly stated they expect nothing short of absolute perfection in every aspect of this collaboration. He clicked his platinum remote control, and sophisticated holographic projections materialized in the air above the polished conference table, displaying complex financial charts, architectural renderings, and detailed demographic analyses. Before we proceed with final authorization, are there any remaining questions or concerns about our strategic approach? The massive oak doors, each weighing several hundred pounds and crafted from ancient trees that had stood for centuries, creaked open with a whispered protest. Carmen Torres slipped inside as quietly as possible, maneuvering her professional cleaning cart with practiced stealth across the Persian carpet that had cost more than most people earned in a year. At 35, Carmen had maintained her position as David's personal housekeeper for exactly 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days, ensuring his penthouse office remained in immaculate condition through her meticulous attention to every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Her daughter Maya, a petite 7-year-old girl with intensely curious dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her and wild curls that defied every attempt at conventional styling, cautiously peeked around her mother's legs like a small woodland creature observing potential predators. "Mummy, why are all these important-looking people wearing exactly the same boring black and grey clothes?" Maya whispered, with the innocent directness that only children possess, but her naturally clear voice carried distinctly in the suddenly and completely silent room, reaching every corner despite her attempt at discretion. David's angular jaw tightened with visible irritation, the muscles in his neck tensing as his carefully maintained professional composure threatened to crack under the unexpected interruption. "Carmen, we have discussed this specific situation multiple times in the past. Absolutely no children are permitted during critical board meetings, regardless of circumstances." "I'm deeply sorry, Mr. Richardson," Carmen stammered nervously, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson as embarrassment flooded through her entire body. "Maya's regular daycare facility closed unexpectedly early this afternoon because of the severe weather warnings, and I couldn't find alternative arrangements on such short notice. I'll immediately remove her from—" "It's perfectly okay, Mija," Maya stepped forward with the fearless confidence that only children seem to naturally possess, completely undaunted by the roomful of powerful adults who were all staring at her with various expressions of surprise, amusement, and concern. She looked directly up at David with unwavering eye contact, tilting her small head thoughtfully to one side in a gesture that somehow managed to be both endearing and disconcerting. "You look really grumpy and stressed today, Mr. Richardson. Are you having a particularly bad day? Maybe you need a hug or something?" Several board members exchanged meaningful glances and chuckled nervously under their breath, shifting uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. David's legendary reputation for maintaining ice-cold professionalism in every situation was well known throughout the Manhattan financial district, and witnessing a 7-year-old child address him as if he were simply another human being rather than a corporate titan was simultaneously terrifying and genuinely amusing to observe. "Maya, come back here right now!" Carmen reached desperately for her daughter with growing panic, her voice tight with maternal anxiety. But Maya had already wandered closer to the mesmerizing holographic displays with the natural curiosity that defined her entire personality. "Wow, these pictures are actually floating in the air!" Maya's eyes widened with genuine wonder and scientific fascination as she studied the three-dimensional projections from multiple angles. "Is this presentation about the Korean business deal that I heard you discussing? Because I happen to speak Korean fluently, along with Spanish, English, French, and Italian too. 5 languages total, and I'm working on learning Mandarin Chinese from online tutorials." The sophisticated boardroom erupted in polite but clearly condescending laughter that echoed off the marble walls. Board member Thomas Wellington, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and a Harvard MBA, slapped the mahogany table with theatrical amusement. 5 languages, that's absolutely adorable and precious. Honestly, I can barely manage to handle basic English coherently on Monday mornings after a long weekend. David forced what he hoped appeared to be a genuine smile, though sharp irritation continued to flicker dangerously across his chiseled features like lightning threatening to break through storm clouds. "That's very creative and imaginative, Maya. But right now, the adults have extremely important work to accomplish, and we really cannot afford any additional delays or distractions." "I'm definitely not lying or making things up," Maya said with matter-of-fact sincerity, her small hands gesturing expressively in the air as she spoke, mimicking the confident body language she had observed in countless business presentations. "Mummy taught me Spanish and Italian because my abuela Rosa lives in Rome, and I talk to her every Sunday on video calls. Mrs. Peterson, our elderly neighbor next door, taught me French because she moved here from Paris 40 years ago and gets lonely for her native language. And I learned Korean and improved my English by watching educational YouTube videos and checking out advanced books from the public library because I genuinely want to understand and communicate with everyone I meet." The laughter throughout the room grew louder and more pronounced. Even David's mouth twitched with reluctant amusement, despite his growing impatience with the entire situation. "Maya, 7-year-old children simply do not speak 5 different languages with any degree of fluency. That's not how language acquisition works in childhood development." "Oh, but I actually do speak them fluently," Maya insisted, with unwavering determination, crossing her small arms across her chest in a gesture of defiant confidence. "Would you like me to prove it right now? I can tell you exactly what your Korean business partners are really saying in their private email correspondence. Sometimes adults say completely different things in different languages when they think no one else will understand them. Carmen, please remove your daughter immediately." David's patience was rapidly wearing dangerously thin, his voice taking on the sharp edge that made experienced executives tremble. This was arguably the most crucial meeting of his entire professional career, and he desperately needed to maintain absolute authority and control over every aspect of the situation. Before Carmen could formulate any response or take action, David's sophisticated smartphone erupted with urgent, piercing ringtones that seemed to fill every corner of the spacious room. The illuminated caller ID displayed "Urgent Crisis, Seoul Office" in bold red letters. David's stomach immediately dropped like a stone as dread washed over him. His Korean business partners never called during American business hours unless something was catastrophically and irreversibly wrong. "Please excuse me for just one moment," David answered the call with forced calm, his voice betraying none of the anxiety that was rapidly building in his chest. "Richardson speaking." "What's the nature of the emergency?" The frantic, panic-stricken voice of James Mitchell exploded through the speakerphone with such urgency that it seemed to physically fill every corner of the elegant boardroom, causing several board members to instinctively lean forward with growing concern and apprehension. "Mr. Richardson, this is James Mitchell calling from our Seoul office, and we have an absolutely critical crisis situation that demands your immediate attention." James's voice cracked with stress and barely controlled panic. "Our primary Korean translator has just discovered serious and potentially devastating discrepancies in the contract documents that we've been working on for months. Someone has been deliberately and systematically feeding us false information, completely altering the fundamental terms of our agreement. But our local translator unexpectedly quit without notice 30 minutes ago. And we desperately need someone who understands both sophisticated Korean business language and complex English legal terminology immediately. The contract signing ceremony is scheduled in exactly 2 hours, and if we cannot verify and correct these documents before then, we will lose absolutely everything we've worked toward." David's face drained of color as the full magnitude of the crisis became crystal clear. $2 billion hung precariously in the balance, and his usual Korean interpreter was currently in Tokyo working for another high-profile client and completely unreachable. "James, exactly how severe is this situation? What kind of discrepancies are we dealing with? Severe enough that I strongly suspect deliberate corporate sabotage, Mr. Richardson. Someone with access to our confidential communications has been systematically and intentionally mistranslating crucial contract clauses, fundamentally altering payment schedules, delivery requirements, and legal obligations. We need a native-level Korean speaker who possesses deep understanding of complex international business terminology, and we need them in Seoul within the next 90 minutes. The distinguished board members exchanged increasingly worried glances around the mahogany table, their confident expressions rapidly transforming into masks of barely concealed fear and anxiety. David ran his perfectly manicured hand through his immaculately styled dark hair, his brilliant mind racing frantically through increasingly limited options and potential solutions. Every professional translator in Manhattan was either completely unavailable, already committed to other urgent projects, or would require several hours to complete the necessary security clearance protocols. Maya stepped forward with quiet confidence, her small voice somehow managing to cut cleanly through the mounting tension and palpable anxiety that filled the room like fog. "I can help you solve this problem." The sophisticated boardroom fell completely and utterly silent, except for the storm that was intensifying outside, rain beginning to lash violently against the reinforced windows 40 floors above the bustling city streets below. "Maya, this is absolutely not the appropriate time for games or pretending," Carmen whispered with mortification, her face burning with embarrassment as she realized her daughter had just offered to solve a multi-billion-dollar international crisis. But David was staring intently at the small girl with entirely new eyes, his analytical mind rapidly processing this unexpected development. In 3 full years of employment, Maya had never once lied to him about anything. Not about accidentally broken vases, not about spilled juice on expensive carpets, not about forgotten household chores or missed responsibilities. She possessed an almost unsettling honesty and integrity that frequently made adults uncomfortable, because children were not supposed to be so consistently truthful. "James, please hold the line for just one moment," David said slowly and deliberately, his voice taking on a different quality as he looked down at Maya with growing curiosity. "Maya, what exactly did you just say?" Maya looked up at him with complete and absolute seriousness, her dark eyes reflecting a maturity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I said I can help solve your problem. I really do speak Korean fluently, and if someone is deliberately trying to deceive and trick you, I can definitely tell you what they're actually doing." The experienced board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, their faces reflecting the same mixture of desperate hope and complete disbelief that was clearly visible on David's features. This was either desperate enough to actually work or completely insane enough to destroy everything they had built over decades. "James," David made a split-second decision that would either save his company or completely destroy his hard-earned professional reputation. "I need you to test someone's Korean language abilities. Can you speak some complex Korean business terminology over the phone?" "What? Sir, I don't understand what you're asking me to do." "Are you saying you have a Korean speaker available? Just do exactly what I'm asking, please. Trust me on this." There was a long pause filled with crackling static. Then James began speaking rapid, sophisticated Korean, his pronunciation careful and precise as he articulated complex business phrases with the fluency of someone who had spent years mastering the intricacies of international commerce. The elaborate business terminology flowed through the high-quality speakerphone system, filling the silent boardroom with urgent foreign syllables that carried the weight of billions of dollars in potential consequences. Maya listened with intense concentration, her 7-year-old face scrunched in focused attention as she processed every nuance of pronunciation, grammar, and context. When James finished his comprehensive test, she stepped closer to the sophisticated communication system with growing confidence. The man speaking Korean said that the contract has serious problems with the payment schedules and delivery timelines. Maya began, her voice clear, confident, and remarkably composed for someone her age. "Someone has deliberately changed critical words to make it appear that your company has to pay the entire amount up front, but the Korean company doesn't have to deliver the promised services until much later in the timeline. That's completely unfair to everyone involved, and it's definitely not what you originally agreed to in your preliminary negotiations." The room went absolutely silent, except for the sound of David's heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird desperate for escape. James Mitchell's shocked and disbelieving voice came through the speaker with crystal clarity. How could she possibly know that? "I've been struggling to explain this exact problem in English for 20 minutes, and she just summarized the entire situation perfectly in terms that make complete sense." Maya wasn't finished with her analysis. "Also, the person who's been translating documents for your business relationship, they've deliberately changed some important numbers and financial figures. In Korean, the contract specifically states that your company pays additional fees and penalties that aren't mentioned anywhere in the English version. Someone is systematically trying to steal money from both sides of this partnership." David sank heavily into his leather chair, staring at Maya with something that could only be described as pure awe and amazement. Thomas Wellington was gripping the edge of the conference table so tightly that his knuckles had turned completely white with tension. "Maya," David said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper, How do you possibly know all of this complicated information? They. Maya shrugged with the casual indifference that only children could manage when discussing something they found perfectly natural, as if analyzing complex international business fraud was a completely normal Tuesday afternoon activity. I watch the Korean Business News channel with Mrs. Kim at the public library every Wednesday after school. She teaches me all the difficult words and complicated phrases because I ask lots of questions about everything, and I read books about how international companies work because Mommy says understanding money and business is important for my future success. Carmen stood frozen by the heavy oak doors, her face cycling rapidly through shock, overwhelming pride, and absolute terror as she watched her 7-year-old daughter casually discuss international corporate fraud with the confidence of a seasoned business analyst. In 3 full years of working for David Richardson, maintaining his penthouse office and managing his personal affairs, she had never once mentioned Maya's extraordinary intellectual abilities. She had been far too afraid of seeming presumptuous or overreaching, too worried about their fragile financial stability and their precarious position in David's carefully ordered world. "James," David said, his voice growing stronger and more authoritative with each word, "I want you to put Maya on a secure video conference call immediately. I want our Korean partners to hear this analysis directly from the source, without any possibility of miscommunication or misunderstanding." Within just a few minutes, David's massive wall-mounted screen came alive with the crystal-clear image of a modern Seoul conference room where 5 impeccably dressed Korean executives sat around a polished table, their faces displaying obvious tension and worry about the crisis that threatened to destroy months of careful negotiations. When they saw Maya, a small child sitting in David's enormous leather chair that completely dwarfed her tiny frame, their expressions shifted dramatically to visible confusion and barely concealed skepticism. Maya bowed politely in the traditional Korean manner, demonstrating perfect cultural awareness and respect, then began speaking fluent Korean with pronunciation so natural and sophisticated that David literally couldn't believe what he was hearing. Her voice carried the subtle tonal variations and cultural nuances that typically took years of intensive study to master. The Korean executives leaned forward collectively, their eyes widening progressively as Maya explained the contract discrepancies in meticulous detail, pointing out specific clauses, numerical inconsistencies, and legal terminology that had been deliberately altered to create confusion and facilitate theft. The eldest Korean partner, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and intelligent eyes that spoke of decades of business experience, responded rapidly in Korean, his tone reflecting both surprise and growing respect. Maya listened intently, processing every word with obvious comprehension, then turned to face David with complete composure. "Mr. Park says they suspected something was fundamentally wrong with the translations, but they didn't want to accuse anyone of deliberate fraud without concrete proof and evidence," Maya reported, with the precision of a professional interpreter. He's genuinely grateful that someone finally caught these mistakes before they signed the documents. He also says, Maya paused, looking slightly embarrassed by the compliment. He says, "I speak Korean significantly better than most American business people he's encountered in 30 years of international commerce." All the Korean executives were nodding enthusiastically among themselves, speaking in rapid, excited Korean, while gesturing toward the screen with obvious approval and amazement. Maya translated simultaneously, her small voice carrying the weight of international diplomacy. "They're saying they want to completely restart the negotiations with honest, trustworthy translators who have no hidden agenda. Mr. Park's daughter is a respected lawyer in Seoul, and she can help ensure that everything is completely fair and transparent for everyone involved. David felt a strange mixture of powerful emotions that he couldn't immediately identify or understand. Relief, certainly, as the immediate crisis seemed to be resolving in their favor. Amazement, absolutely, as he witnessed capabilities in Maya that defied everything he thought he knew about child development. But something else was stirring deep in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in many years, something warm and unfamiliar that made his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Maya," he said softly, his voice carrying genuine gratitude and respect, "you have just saved my company from complete financial destruction." Maya beamed with innocent pleasure at the praise, but then her expression grew serious and contemplative in the way that suggested she was processing information on multiple levels simultaneously. "Mr. Richardson, there's something else important that you need to know. The person who was deliberately changing the translations and stealing money. I think I know exactly who it is." The room went silent again, the weight of potential revelation hanging in the air like a physical presence. David leaned forward with intense focus and growing dread. "What do you mean by that, Maya?" "When Mummy cleans your office every evening, sometimes I help organize papers and files to make her job easier," Maya began, her voice taking on the matter-of-fact tone she used when explaining something perfectly obvious. "I've seen multiple emails from someone named Patricia Manning over the past several weeks. She sends secret messages in Korean to a company that isn't the same as Mr. Park's legitimate business. And she uses specific words and phrases that mean she's receiving money in exchange for creating these problems and causing confusion." David's blood ran cold as the implications of Maya's words sank in with devastating clarity. Patricia Manning was his head of international acquisitions. She had complete and unrestricted access to all Korean correspondence, was responsible for vetting and approving all translators, and possessed the authority to make changes to contract documents without immediate oversight. She was one of the few people in the company with both the access and expertise necessary to orchestrate such an elaborate fraud. Thomas Wellington was already pulling out his phone with grim determination. "David, I can have our security department pull Patricia's complete email records and communication logs within 10 minutes. Today it is," but David wasn't listening to Thomas or anyone else in the room. He was staring at Maya, this remarkable 7-year-old girl who had just exposed a multi-million-dollar conspiracy that could have destroyed everything he'd spent 2 decades building. The weight of what had almost happened and what she had prevented was slowly settling over him like a heavy blanket. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "how long have you known about Patricia's suspicious activities?" Maya looked down at her feet, suddenly displaying the shy uncertainty that was more typical of her age, her confidence wavering for the first time since entering the boardroom. "A few weeks now, maybe a month. But Mommy always says I shouldn't bother important people with things that aren't really my business or responsibility. I was planning to tell you eventually, but..." She glanced nervously at Carmen, who looked like she might faint from the combination of pride, fear, and overwhelming responsibility. David stood up slowly, walked deliberately around the massive conference table, and knelt down carefully to Maya's eye level, bringing himself to her physical height for the first time in their 3-year acquaintance. For the first time in many years, his carefully maintained corporate mask slipped completely away, revealing the human being underneath all the success and authority. "Maya," he said with absolute sincerity, "you are the smartest, most observant person in this room, full of supposedly intelligent adults. And what you accomplished today, catching this fraud, preventing this disaster, saving this company, it was very much your business and your responsibility. Thank you for having the courage to speak up when it mattered most." Maya's face lit up with the purest, most genuine smile David had ever witnessed in his adult life, an expression of joy so authentic that it seemed to illuminate the entire room. "You're welcome. Can I help with more business problems in the future? I really like solving complicated puzzles, and this one was really interesting once I found all the pieces." The Korean executives were still visible on screen, and Mr. Park spoke directly to Maya in fluent Korean, his tone warm and respectful. She laughed with childlike delight and responded enthusiastically, then turned back to David with obvious excitement. "He wants to know if you'll bring me to Seoul when you sign the corrected contract next week," Maya reported with growing enthusiasm. "He says his granddaughter is 8 years old and speaks 3 languages, and he thinks they should definitely be friends and practice together." David looked around the boardroom at 12 successful, accomplished men who were all staring at a 7-year-old girl with something approaching genuine reverence and respect. Then he looked at Carmen, whose eyes were filled with tears of pride, fear, and overwhelming love for her extraordinary daughter. Something fundamental and irreversible was shifting in David Richardson's carefully controlled world, cracking open walls he'd built so long ago that he'd forgotten they existed. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't thinking about profit margins, board meetings, corporate strategy, or market dominance. He was thinking about how a 7-year-old girl had just changed his entire world in the span of a single afternoon, and wondering what other miracles he might have been missing while he was too busy being successful to notice the magic happening right in front of him. 23 minutes later, the Richardson Tower's expansive marble lobby filled with the measured, purposeful footsteps of federal agents, their crisp black suits and intensely serious expressions causing a noticeable stir among the usual sophisticated flow of executives, investors, and international visitors who frequented the building's prestigious address. Agent Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s with an MBA from Wharton Business School and 15 years of specialized white-collar crime investigation experience, led the coordinated team with quiet, commanding authority that immediately commanded respect from everyone who crossed her path. David had strategically moved the entire critical meeting to his private conference room, a space normally reserved for only the most confidential and sensitive corporate discussions. Maya sat cross-legged on the imported Italian marble floor, completely surrounded by carefully sorted stacks of printed emails, financial documents, and evidence materials, methodically organizing everything with the systematic approach and attention to detail of a seasoned criminal investigator who had spent years perfecting their analytical techniques. Carmen hovered nearby with obvious maternal anxiety, still struggling to process the surreal reality that her 7-year-old daughter had somehow become the central figure in a major federal investigation that could determine the fate of a multi-billion-dollar corporation and potentially expose an international criminal conspiracy. "Mr. Richardson," Agent Chen extended her hand with professional courtesy and measured formality. "I understand we have a very unusual and unprecedented situation developing here. Where exactly is our key witness who reportedly uncovered this fraud network?" Maya looked up from her meticulous paper sorting, a rebellious strand of curly hair falling across her forehead as she smiled brightly at the federal agent. "Hi, Agent Chen, I'm Maya, and I'm really glad you're here to help catch the bad people. I organized all the suspicious emails chronologically by date and systematically by language, so you can see exactly how Patricia's lies got bigger and more complicated over time." Agent Chen blinked several times, clearly struggling to reconcile the serious professional phone conversation she'd had earlier with the small child who was now confidently offering her a stack of meticulously organized documents that represented months of sophisticated investigative work. "Maya, I need to ask you some very important questions for our official investigation, Agent Chen said, pulling out a digital recording device and setting it on the conference table. Can you tell me exactly how you first discovered Patricia Manning's fraudulent activities and walk me through your investigative process step by step? Maya stood up gracefully, brushing imaginary dust off her bright yellow dress with the careful attention to appearance that she had learned from watching professional adults, and approached Agent Chen with the same unshakable confidence she had demonstrated with David earlier in the day. It started approximately 6 weeks ago, Maya began, with the precision of someone providing official testimony, when I was helping Mammy organize Mr. Richardson's extensive filing cabinets during our regular after-hours cleaning routine. I noticed that Patricia's emails followed strange and inconsistent patterns that didn't make logical sense. She would send detailed messages in English to Korean business partners, but then send completely different messages in Korean to the same exact people, saying things that directly contradicted her English communications. Agent Chen activated her recorder and leaned forward with growing interest. Maya, I'm going to record our conversation for official purposes, okay? Can you explain more specifically what you mean by opposite things in these communications? Absolutely. Maya's face lit up with the genuine enthusiasm of someone discussing their favorite intellectual challenge. For example, in her English correspondence, she would inform the Korean company that Mr. Richardson had agreed to pay 50% of the total contract value up front as an initial payment. But in her Korean messages to the same executives, she would claim that he had actually agreed to pay 70% up front, and that the extra 20% difference would be transferred to a secret offshore account that belonged exclusively to her. David felt his hands involuntarily clench into tight fists as the full scope and audacity of Patricia's systematic betrayal became crystal clear. The woman he had trusted with his most sensitive international negotiations had been robbing him blind while simultaneously damaging his reputation with foreign partners. Maya, exactly how many of these financial discrepancies did you identify during your investigation? David asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Maya walked purposefully to a large whiteboard that David typically kept for strategic planning sessions and picked up a black marker with artistic flair. With surprising creative skill and mathematical precision, she began drawing an elaborate flowchart that showed complex money movements between different international accounts, shell companies, and fraudulent financial institutions across multiple countries. I systematically identified 37 distinct lies across 4 different countries, Maya reported, while continuing to add details to her impressive diagram. Patricia was stealing money from everyone involved in these deals. From you, from the Korean company, from the German manufacturing partners, and from the Brazilian agricultural consortium too. She created a web of deception that was designed to make everyone blame each other when money went missing. Agent Chen stared intently at the comprehensive whiteboard, then at Maya's concentrated expression, then back at the sophisticated financial analysis that covered the entire surface. Maya, how did you possibly learn to analyze complex financial fraud patterns with this level of expertise? This represents sophisticated investigative work that typically takes FBI agents many months of intensive training to master. Maya shrugged with the matter-of-fact attitude that had become her trademark response to adult amazement at her capabilities. I genuinely like solving complicated puzzles, and money transactions are just another type of logical puzzle that follows predictable patterns. Numbers and financial flows don't lie, but people sometimes manipulate numbers to make them tell false stories. I learned about international financial patterns and fraud detection techniques from extensive library books about business, economics, and criminal investigation methods. Mrs. Kim at the public library helps me understand the more difficult concepts and terminology. Thomas Wellington was studying Maya's detailed flowchart with rapidly growing amazement and professional admiration. David, this extraordinary child, has just mapped out an international fraud network with a level of detail and accuracy that our entire accounting department would have required several weeks to uncover and verify. Before David could formulate any response to Thomas's observation, his office door burst open with dramatic force. Patricia Manning stood in the doorway like a cornered animal, her usually perfect blonde hair disheveled and unkempt, her expensive designer suit wrinkled and stained, and her normally confident blue eyes wild with desperation and barely controlled panic. A uniformed security guard stood directly behind her, looking apologetic about the interruption, but determined to maintain his duties. "David, there's been a terrible and completely unfair misunderstanding about my activities," Patricia began with frantic urgency, her voice pitched significantly higher than its usual professional tone and cracking with stress. "I tried to leave the building for a legitimate business appointment, but your security team stopped me without explanation. I honestly don't know what someone has told you, but I can explain everything if you'll just give me a few minutes to—" Her desperate words died abruptly as she fully absorbed the scene before her. Agent Chen's prominently displayed FBI badge, Maya's comprehensive evidence chart covering the whiteboard, and the multiple federal agents positioned strategically around the room with official authority. The remaining color drained completely from her face as the undeniable reality of her situation became impossible to ignore or explain away. "Patricia Manning," Agent Chen said with calm, professional authority, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit international financial crimes, and violation of multiple federal banking regulations. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Patricia's horrified gaze fell on Maya, who was watching the dramatic arrest with the fascinated attention of someone witnessing justice being served in real time. "You!" Patricia whispered, her voice filled with complete disbelief and rapidly growing rage. "A child. A goddamn child caught me. How is that even possible?" Maya looked up at Patricia with genuine curiosity rather than fear or intimidation, tilting her head thoughtfully as she considered the question. "You made a lot of careless mistakes, Ms. Manning. You should have been much more careful with your Korean grammar and sentence structure. You used informal language in formal business contexts, which immediately seemed suspicious. And you left obvious digital footprints in 7 different international banking systems across 4 countries. That was really sloppy investigative work for someone who's supposed to be smart about international business and financial crimes." Patricia lunged forward with sudden, desperate aggression, but the alert security guard immediately caught her arm and restrained her movements. "You interfering little brat. Do you have any idea what you've done to my life? I had carefully laid plans, I had a secure financial future, I had connections and opportunities that took me years to develop, and you've destroyed everything. You had stolen money and deliberately hurt innocent people," Maya replied with simple, unshakable moral clarity. "That's not a good plan for anyone, and it definitely wasn't going to end well for you." As federal agents led Patricia away in handcuffs through the marble corridors, her angry protests echoing off the walls until the elevator doors closed behind them, David sank heavily into his leather chair, completely overwhelmed by the rapid sequence of life-changing events that had unfolded in a single afternoon. In less than 2 hours, Maya had saved his company from financial destruction, exposed a sophisticated international fraud ring, and demonstrated intellectual capabilities that defied everything he thought he understood about child development and human potential. Agent Chen, David said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper as the weight of everything settled over him. "What happens to my company now? What are the next steps in this investigation? Now we systematically recover all the stolen funds, prosecute the full criminal conspiracy across multiple international jurisdictions, and ensure that your legitimate business partnerships proceed without any further interference or complications." Agent Chen replied with reassuring professional confidence. "But Mr. Richardson, I want you to understand the full scope of what almost happened here. Without Maya's intervention and detective work, Patricia Manning would have disappeared tonight with enough incriminating evidence to bring down your entire company and frame you for serious financial crimes that you never committed." Maya was already back at the whiteboard, adding new connections and relationships to her comprehensive fraud diagram with the focused concentration of a professional analyst. "Agent Chen, there's something else really important you need to know. Patricia wasn't working alone in this criminal conspiracy. She has a primary partner in Switzerland who helps hide and launder the stolen money through offshore accounts, and another co-conspirator in Seoul who systematically changes official documents after they're signed by legitimate parties. Do you want me to show you exactly how their network operates?" 6 hours later, as the intense storm outside finally began to subside and the first brilliant evening stars appeared through the clearing clouds that had dominated the Manhattan skyline all day, David found himself in a position he never could have imagined even in his wildest dreams, sitting comfortably on his expensive office floor, sharing authentic Chinese takeout with Carmen and Maya, while federal agents worked efficiently around them, systematically dismantling one of the largest and most sophisticated international fraud networks in recent criminal history. Maya had her sleek silver laptop open, a sophisticated device that David had never seen her use before and couldn't remember her having access to, typing rapidly with remarkable speed while seamlessly switching between Korean, English, German and French phone conversations with law enforcement agencies across 3 different continents. Her extraordinary ability to coordinate complex international investigations while maintaining the cheerful, optimistic demeanor of a typical 7-year-old child was nothing short of absolutely extraordinary and constantly amazing to witness. "Maya," David said between thoughtful bites of lo mein noodles, "where exactly did you get that expensive laptop, and how long have you been using it for investigative work?" Carmen and Maya exchanged a quick, meaningful glance that David definitely didn't miss, a moment of silent communication that suggested they were sharing information he wasn't privy to. Carmen carefully set down her chopsticks, her expression growing noticeably serious and slightly nervous as she prepared to reveal something significant. "Mr. Richardson," Carmen began with obvious caution and measured words, "there are some important things about Maya that I haven't told you over the past 3 years. Things I was genuinely afraid to share because I didn't want you to think I was deliberately taking advantage of your kindness or trying to manipulate our employment situation for personal gain." David felt a familiar, uncomfortable tightening in his chest, the same unsettling sensation he'd experienced when Patricia's betrayal was first revealed earlier in the day. "What kind of things are you referring to, Carmen?" Maya closed her laptop with a decisive click and looked directly at David with those remarkably perceptive dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Mommy's really scared to tell you the complete truth because she thinks you'll get angry and fire her immediately. But I think you should know everything, especially after everything that happened today and how much we've all been through together. Maya, please don't." Carmen started with obvious distress, but Maya held up her small hand with surprising authority. "It's okay, Mummy. Mr. Richardson deserves to know the truth about us." Maya turned back to David with complete seriousness. "My real name isn't Maya Torres, like you've always believed. It's actually Maya Chen Torres, And Carmen isn't just my mother, she's also Dr. Carmen Torres, who has a doctorate degree in international business and advanced linguistics from Columbia University, along with 2 master's degrees in economics and political science. David's chopsticks clattered loudly to the marble floor as the implications of this revelation hit him like a physical blow. "What did you just say?" Carmen's face flushed with deep shame and fear as years of carefully maintained deception finally crumbled. "David, please let me explain the situation completely. When I applied for the housekeeper position exactly 3 years ago, I was absolutely desperate and had no other options. My husband had died unexpectedly in a car accident. I had no savings or financial resources, and Maya needed immediate stability and specialized care. I couldn't find appropriate work in my professional field because I didn't have the right connections, networking relationships, or employment references in America. The housekeeper job paid just enough to keep us safely housed and properly fed, and you seemed fundamentally kind, even if you were emotionally distant and professionally focused. You've been cleaning my office and organizing my personal affairs for 3 full years," David said slowly, his voice filled with growing shock and disbelief. "When you're actually qualified to run sophisticated international business operations and manage complex corporate strategies. I have 2 master's degrees and a PhD from prestigious universities," Carmen admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But advanced degrees don't pay rent or put food on the table when you're an immigrant widow with a profoundly gifted child who needs special educational resources, medical monitoring, and social therapy that costs significantly more than most people earn in an entire year." Maya reached over and squeezed her mother's hand with gentle reassurance, her small fingers intertwining with Carmen's in a gesture of unconditional love and support. "Mommy sacrificed absolutely everything for me and my special needs. She could have taken a high-paying corporate job in another city with better opportunities, but she deliberately stayed here because the public library has the best language learning programs in the region, and Mrs. Kim volunteers her time to help kids like me who need extra intellectual stimulation." David stared at Carmen with growing horror and understanding as the full scope of her sacrifice became clear. "Kids like you? Maya, what exactly are you saying about yourself?" Maya took a deep, thoughtful breath, her 7-year-old face reflecting a level of maturity and self-awareness that seemed impossible for someone her age. "Mr. Richardson, I'm what child psychologists and educational specialists call profoundly gifted. My IQ tested at 187 when I was 5 years old, which puts me in the top 0.01% of the global population. I don't just speak 5 languages like I told you earlier. I actually speak 8 languages fluently and can read competently in 12 different languages. I understand complex mathematics at a college level, international law principles, computer programming languages, and sophisticated financial systems because my brain processes and connects information in ways that are fundamentally different from most people." The conference room fell completely and utterly silent, except for the distant sounds of federal agents working methodically in the outer office spaces, their voices carrying the serious tone of professionals dismantling a major criminal operation. David felt the entire world tilting beneath him as everything he thought he knew about his life rearranged itself into a completely different and far more complex picture. "You've been living in my building for 3 years, David said slowly, his voice filled with dawning realization. "Watching me struggle with international business problems that you could have solved in minutes, observing my loneliness and isolation while remaining silent about your extraordinary capabilities." "I desperately wanted to help you," Maya said softly, her voice carrying genuine sadness and regret. "But Mommy made me promise never to show off my abilities or draw unwanted attention to myself. She was afraid people would think she was using me to manipulate situations, get better employment opportunities, or receive special treatment. And honestly, Mr. Richardson, you seemed like you didn't want to be bothered by anyone, especially not by a weird little girl who knows too much about things children aren't supposed to understand. Carmen was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks as years of hidden stress and fear finally found release. David, I know I should have told you the complete truth from the beginning, but I was absolutely terrified of losing the only stable employment I could find in America. Maya needed ongoing medical monitoring for her intellectual development, specialized educational programs that cost thousands of dollars, and social therapy to help her relate to other children who couldn't understand her advanced capabilities. All things I couldn't possibly afford without steady, reliable employment. David stood up abruptly, walking deliberately to his floor-to-ceiling windows to stare out at the glittering city lights that stretched endlessly below, each light representing thousands of people living their own complex lives. For 3 full years, he had been living in the same building as a child genius and her brilliant mother, treating them as essentially invisible servants, while they quietly observed his professional struggles and personal loneliness from the shadows of his carefully controlled world. "Agent Chen," he called to the federal agent, who was efficiently coordinating multiple investigations from his conference table, surrounded by laptops, phones, and official documents. "How common are children like Maya in the general population?" Agent Chen looked up from her extensive files and case materials. "Profoundly gifted children with multiple language fluency and advanced analytical skills. Maybe 1 in 50 million births worldwide. Children who can intuitively detect complex fraud patterns and coordinate international investigations. Mr. Richardson, I've never encountered anyone like Maya in 15 years of investigating sophisticated financial crimes." Maya had been quietly listening to rapid Korean phone conversations on her laptop while taking detailed notes in multiple languages. Now she looked up with obvious concern and urgency. "Mr. Richardson, the Seoul office just told me something really important that we need to act on immediately. Patricia's Swiss partner is planning to disappear tomorrow morning with all the recovered stolen money. If the Swiss police don't arrest him before midnight tonight, you'll never recover the $15 million, and he'll probably start the same fraud scheme with other companies." David turned back to the room, his mind racing through options and potential consequences. What exactly do we need to do to prevent this? The Swiss partner only speaks German and French fluently," Maya explained, with characteristic thoroughness, "and he's much more careful with his criminal activities than Patricia was. The Swiss police need someone who can translate his complex bank records in real time and explain the fraud methodology to their financial crimes unit with complete accuracy. It has to be someone who understands both languages perfectly and possesses deep knowledge of international banking law and criminal investigation procedures." Carmen looked at Maya with a mixture of overwhelming pride and maternal resignation. "Maya, coordinating international law enforcement isn't our responsibility or obligation. We've already done more than enough to help." "JD." But Maya was already standing up with determined purpose, her laptop tucked securely under her arm and her expression reflecting the focused intensity of someone preparing to tackle another challenging intellectual puzzle. "Actually, Mammy, I think it is our responsibility now. Mr. Richardson helped us when we desperately needed a safe home and financial stability. Now we can help him when he needs our unique abilities and specialized knowledge." David felt something shift fundamentally and permanently in his chest as he watched this extraordinary child prepare to coordinate complex international law enforcement activities across multiple time zones, languages, and legal systems. 3 years ago, he had hired Carmen as a simple housekeeper to maintain his office cleanliness. Today, he was realizing he had accidentally acquired a remarkable family he never knew he needed. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine respect and gratitude, "would you like to help me save those $15 million and catch the remaining criminals?" Maya grinned with the pure, infectious joy of someone about to solve another fascinating intellectual challenge. "Yes, please. But Mr. Richardson, after we catch all the bad guys and recover all the stolen money, can we have a serious conversation about maybe getting a much better job for Mummy? Because she's really, really smart too, and cleaning offices is kind of a terrible waste of her incredible brain and advanced education." David looked at Carmen with completely new eyes, seeing her clearly for the first time in 3 years of daily interaction. "Dr. Torres, how would you feel about accepting the position of my new head of international operations with full authority over all foreign partnerships and business development?" Carmen's tears flowed faster, but now they were tears of overwhelming relief, gratitude and hope for a future she had never dared to imagine. "David, yes, absolutely. I accept with tremendous gratitude." Maya clapped her hands together with pure delight. "This is going to be the best job arrangement ever. Can I have my own official office with a nameplate? And can we get a coffee machine that makes hot chocolate for important meetings? And maybe we could fill some bookshelves with interesting books in different languages for when I get bored during long adult conversations." As Maya began confidently coordinating with Swiss authorities in fluent German and French, her small voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through demonstrated competence, David realized that his carefully ordered corporate world was about to become far more complicated, far more interesting, and infinitely more rewarding than he had ever imagined possible. 3 months later, David stood in the exact same boardroom where everything had changed, but the space felt entirely different now, transformed by purpose and human connection rather than cold corporate efficiency. The walls displayed framed photographs from the successful Seoul contract signing, where Maya had served as the youngest official interpreter in recorded international business history, charming Korean executives while facilitating billion-dollar agreements with remarkable competence. A small but professionally equipped desk sat in the corner, Maya's official workspace, complete with her own engraved nameplate reading Maya Chen Torres, Junior International Relations Consultant, and a collection of books in 12 different languages that she referenced during meetings with increasing frequency. Dr. Carmen Torres, now impeccably dressed in a tailored business suit that properly reflected her true professional status and academic achievements, was presenting detailed quarterly reports to the attentive board with the expertise and confidence that had been hidden beneath her housekeeper's uniform for 3 long, difficult years. Her transformation had been remarkable to witness, but David knew the most significant transformation had been his own emotional and psychological evolution. The Seoul partnership has exceeded all projected revenues by 37%, Carmen reported to the board members, who now treated her with the respect and admiration she had always deserved. The Korean partners have specifically requested Maya's direct involvement in all future negotiations, and we've received similar formal requests from business leaders in Germany, Brazil, Japan, and Australia, who have heard about her unique capabilities and want to experience her analytical skills firsthand. Maya, now wearing a miniature business suit that perfectly matched her mother's professional attire, was simultaneously translating a live video conference with Tokyo executives while taking comprehensive notes in 3 different languages. Her remarkable ability to multitask at such a sophisticated level, continuing to amaze everyone who had the privilege of witnessing her work. Thomas Wellington raised his hand with obvious pride in Maya's achievements. "Carmen, what's the final status of the stolen funds recovery operation?" "Complete recovery, plus substantial penalties. Carmen smiled with satisfaction. Patricia Manning's criminal network had stolen exactly $15.2 million from our accounts. But through Maya's detailed financial analysis and international law enforcement cooperation, we recovered $18.7 million through asset forfeiture and penalty payments. Maya's comprehensive fraud detection methods helped law enforcement recover funds from additional cases that predated our involvement by several years. Agent Chen, who had become a regular and welcome visitor to Richardson Enterprises, spoke from the large video screen with obvious professional admiration. Maya's pattern recognition abilities helped us solve 12 additional major fraud cases across 6 countries, recovering over $60 million in stolen assets. The FBI is seriously considering creating a special consultant position specifically for linguistically gifted individuals with advanced analytical capabilities. Maya would be our first candidate when she reaches appropriate age for federal employment. Maya looked up from her simultaneous translation work, grinning widely with genuine excitement about the possibility. That sounds really fun and challenging, but I also want to start a special school for kids who learn differently than typical children. There are lots of children like me scattered around the world who feel weird and alone because their brains work really fast and process information in unusual ways. They need friends who understand them and teachers who know how to challenge them appropriately. David felt the familiar warmth spreading through his chest that had become a daily occurrence since Maya entered his life and changed everything about his priorities and values. Maya, tell me more about this school idea. What would make it different from existing educational institutions? Maya's eyes lit up with passionate enthusiasm as she began describing her detailed vision, with the same analytical precision she applied to fraud investigations. We could have advanced classes conducted in multiple languages, sophisticated mathematics programs for kids who get bored with regular elementary school math, professional-level science laboratories where children can ask questions that adults think are too complicated, and computer programming courses for learning coding and international business principles. And most importantly, we could teach kids that being different and exceptionally smart isn't something to hide or be ashamed of. It's a gift that should be celebrated and developed. Carmen watched her daughter with obvious maternal pride, but David could see concern flickering across her features. Maya, starting a completely new school, requires enormous amounts of money, resources, qualified staff, and regulatory approval. It's not something that happens quickly or easily. Maya turned to David with the expression she wore when she was about to solve another complex logical puzzle. Mr. Richardson, exactly how much money did I save your company by catching Patricia's fraud and helping coordinate the international investigation? David considered this question carefully, running mental calculations through his head. Between the immediate savings from preventing the fraudulent contracts and the additional recoveries from related cases, approximately $53 million in direct financial impact, plus the ongoing international contracts you helped secure and maintain, are worth several billion dollars over the next 5 to 10 years. So technically, Maya said with the impeccable 7-year-old logic that was becoming increasingly difficult for any adult to argue with, I already earned more than enough money to build a really excellent school with all the programs and resources we need, right? The sophisticated boardroom fell completely silent as 12 successful, experienced businessmen processed the absolutely impeccable logic of a child who had just negotiated her way into founding an innovative educational institution using her own demonstrated economic value as justification. Thomas Wellington was the first to break the contemplative silence, laughing with genuine admiration and professional respect. David, I think Maya just presented the most convincing and logically sound business proposal I've heard all year. Her return on investment calculations are flawless. David looked around the room at faces that had dramatically transformed from initially skeptical to completely amazed to totally won over by Maya's remarkable abilities. 3 months ago, these same distinguished men had laughed condescendingly at Maya's claims about speaking multiple languages fluently. Now they were seriously considering funding an innovative educational institution based entirely on her educational philosophy and demonstrated track record of success. "Maya," David said slowly and thoughtfully, "what would you call this special school?" Maya considered this question with the gravity and careful thought she applied to all important decisions that would affect other people's lives. The Richardson Torres Academy for Exceptional Minds. Because you provided the financial opportunity and business expertise, Mami provided the educational wisdom and academic credentials, and I provided the original idea and student perspective. We're a real team now, and the name should reflect all of our contributions. Carmen's eyes filled with tears, not of fear or anxiety this time, but of overwhelming joy, gratitude, and hope for a future that seemed almost too good to be true. Maya, that's a beautiful name that honors everyone involved. David felt something inside him settle into place with perfect rightness, like a missing puzzle piece finally finding its proper home after years of searching. For 38 years, he had measured success exclusively in dollars, contracts, stock prices, and corporate achievements. But watching Maya organize international investigations while simultaneously planning educational institutions and bringing together people across cultural and linguistic barriers, he realized he had been calculating success entirely wrong his whole adult life. "Doctor Torres," he said formally, addressing Carmen with the complete respect her education and professional capabilities deserved, "would you be interested in serving as the Academy's first principal administrator? And Maya, would you like to be our youngest student and primary curriculum consultant?" Maya jumped up and down with excitement that was finally, authentically 7 years old, her previous adult composure giving way to pure childlike joy. "Yes, yes. Can we start with kids who speak multiple languages fluently? And can we have a special program where children teach languages to adults who want to learn? And can we have advanced science labs and computer programming classes, and maybe even a small library with books in lots of different languages?" "Maya," David interrupted gently with growing amusement, "we can do whatever you think will help children reach their full potential and feel proud of their unique abilities." Maya stopped bouncing and looked at David with sudden touching seriousness. "Mr. Richardson, there's one more really important thing I want to ask you, but I don't know if it's appropriate." "What's that, Maya?" "Would you like to be my honorary grandfather?" Maya asked with touching vulnerability. "Because you don't have children of your own, and I don't have a grandfather in America, and I think we could be really good family for each other. You could teach me about business, and I could teach you about having fun and not being lonely all the time." David felt his throat tighten with overwhelming emotion as he knelt down to Maya's level one final time, bringing himself to her physical height and looking directly into her remarkable eyes. "Maya, I would be deeply honored to be your honorary grandfather, and I think you're absolutely right. We make a pretty extraordinary team." And as Maya threw her small arms around his neck in an enthusiastic hug that seemed to pour 3 years of unexpressed affection into a single moment, David realized that the most valuable acquisition of his entire professional career hadn't been a billion-dollar contract, a corporate merger, or even saving his company from destruction. It had been discovering that family could appear in the most unexpected forms, that brilliance often came disguised as simplicity, and that sometimes the greatest treasures in life came wrapped in the form of interruptions to important meetings that turned out to be the most important meetings of all. 6 months later, the Richardson Torres Academy for Exceptional Minds welcomed its first class of 25 carefully selected students from around the world, each child possessing unique gifts that had previously made them feel isolated and different. Maya, now 8 years old and fluent in 10 languages, served as the student ambassador who helped other gifted children understand that being different was not just acceptable. It was extraordinary, valuable, and something to be celebrated rather than hidden. And David Richardson, billionaire CEO turned honorary grandfather, discovered that the best business decision he had ever made was choosing to listen when a 7-year-old girl offered to help solve his problems. Because sometimes the people who seem smallest possess the largest capacity to change everything, and the most important investments we make are not in companies or contracts, but in the remarkable human beings who walk into our lives, disguised as ordinary moments that transform into extraordinary opportunities for love, growth, and connection.